Word to the wise. A few things I want to let you know. It's not your fault you don't know these things. They've gone to great effort and expense in many lives to keep these things from your knowledge. Distractions and entertainment and all that stuff have kept you busy. And just now, they're making it tough for you just to live so that you would not have the time to do the research and homework. So I made for my family, and I guess a great sacrifice, because I could be taking care of mine and bump the rest. But I feel I love you all, because I know you didn't have anything to do with this dumbing down people and enslaving people, programming people. I know it's hard to believe, so this is why this project is to enlighten you. Alright, here's a few things that you should know.
It looks like your average city skyline, but in fact, these images are just an elaborate optical illusion. The amazing mirage appeared over Huangshan City in East China at dusk on Thursday. Following a heavy downpour, the spectacular images of mountains, buildings and trees appeared in the thin mist above the Shinan River. The phenomenon began at about 5 p.m. local time, to the amazement of passers-by.
It's really amazing. It looks like a scene in the movie, in a fairyland.
Although residents say that similar sights have been seen lately, most agreed that this one had been the most impressive.
A hunt for American youth to hunt down the next American enemy. War Incorporated, a robust business machine, is operating at full capacity in the U.S.
Get the strength to change the way people see you. There's strong, and then there's Army Strong.
From televised ads to Hollywood blockbusters, to video games, to American presidents dubbing soldiers the real patriots.
Each of them adds honor to what it means to be a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman.
The image of the American warrior is portrayed as that of the invincible hero. Times Square, one of the #1 entertainment spots in the Big Apple, attracts millions from around the world and across the U.S. Apart from the flashy lights and the billboards, there's a recruitment center right here, one of hundreds just in New York. The mesmerizing techniques luring young Americans into serving are more sophisticated than ever before.
Sponsoring video game tournaments and paintball tournaments, and then going up to these young kids who perform well and say, hey, the U.S. military needs you, we see your skills at this video game. And of course, to a young 15 or 16 or 17-year-old, this is something that's very enticing.
It's a cruel and deceptive type of recruitment. They want to use all the hippest tools they can to make being in the military as cool as possible.
Now a cinematographer, Edward Pages dedicated 10 years to being a U.S. soldier. He thought it was the honorable thing to do.
If they presented the military for what it was, I don't think anyone would join.
But they do join, having played one computer game and seen one war movie too many.
There's no second chances in real life. You can reset a game, you can restart a movie. There's no second chances when you're actually out there and your life is at risk for something that most of these young men have no idea really the true reasons why they're even out there.
By the time some of these reasons are realized,
to expand military influence and domination in these regions of the world that are currently off limits to U.S. imperialism,
it is often too late.
The problem is that a lot of these kids don't know once they get in, it's hard to get out.
For some, the way out is suicide. A military report says 80%
Time once again
of
for Community
soldiers in
Forum,
Afghanistan
and we're
have
very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Peter Leinbaugh. Peter Leinbaugh is professor of history at the University of Toledo. He has taught at Harvard and the Attica Correctional Facility, New York University, and the Federal Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. He has published articles in Counterpunch, the New Left Review, the Times Literary Supplement, the Canadian Journal of History, New York University Law Review, International Socialism, and The Nation. He co-edited Albion's Fatal Tree, Crime and Society in 18th Century England, along with Doug Hay and E.P. Thompson. He is the author of The London Hanged, Crime and Civil Society in the 18th Century. The Many-Headed Hydra, Sailors, Slaves, Commoners, and the Hidden History of the Revolutionary Atlantic, co-authored with Marcus Rediker. And his latest book, The Magna Carta Manifesto, Liberties and Commons for All. Start out, if you would, with the motivation in writing your latest book, The Magna Carta Manifesto.
The motivation, simultaneous war and aggression in Iraq and Afghanistan on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the imprisonment without charges of men and women in Guantanamo and the wholesale destruction of liberties in the USA under the regime of the Bush. The autocracy and tyranny seemed to be coming from every direction, and it was time to look deep into history and to see what are the bases or some of the manuscript basis of human liberty, and see whether or not such old charters as Magna Carta might help us now.
I remember very little from my schooling about the Magna Carta, so I'm hoping you can bring us up to speed on that.
Mike, I was in the same boat, and I knew hardly anything, and that's what sent me back to it. Well, I'm a historian, so I love dates. Let's go back to 1215, June 15th, 1215. Bad King John in England is forced by a whole array of circumstances to sue for an armistice in a civil war. This is in feudal Europe, a time of the Crusades, a time of beginning of commodity production, a time of hostility between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and above all, a time of expropriation of peasants and throughout Europe. Also a time of heresy. 1215 was the same year as the Lateran Council, the beginning of the Inquisition in Europe. So it was a very big turning point in global history. Magna Carta itself is 63 chapters. Each of these is just 2 or 3 lines long. It was written in Latin, became a foundation for English law, the charters of English liberty. Tom Paine said the American colonies needed to have something like it, and as a result, we had the Declaration of Independence. Of course, that's 1776. The chapter 39 of Magna Carta is the one that's often carved on the walls of American courthouses. Students used to be required to memorize it, and it says that no free man shall be deprived of his liberty without judgment by his peers and due process of law. And already, I think, we hear echoes of this in the U.S. Constitution. And indeed, the American Supreme Court has quotes and refers to Magna Carta ever since the beginning of the Supreme Court. That's trial by jury, prohibition of torture, habeas corpus, due process of law. All are legal principles that derive from this 2 or 3 lines of Chapter 39 of Magna Carta. And lawyers, historians, English history nerds, we go back and study this and look at it, but we had forgotten during much of the post-war, second half of the 20th century. And it's time to recall these principles. And as I did so, Mike, I came across even a deeper forgetting. For it's not only the Magna Carta, I said the charters of English liberty. There was 2 of them. And the second one was the Charter of the Forest. And coming here to the Northwest from the Great Lakes region where I live, I was very conscious of this, flying over the mountains and trying to see what forest remained and what did not. For the conquerors of England, the Norman conquest, they came in with their own forest law, which was to preserve the forest basically as a game preserve to the kings. But others who had been using this habitat for millennia, for cattle pasturage, for pigs for pannage in the forest, as a pharmacopoeia, simple one for the peasantry, for fuel, for this was the woodland epoch of history, in contrast to coal or petroleum. Common people had common rights in the forest, and the Charter of the Forest recognized and acknowledged this fact of a commons in the energy habitat of that era. And it was this discovery of mine that just blew me away, because it seemed that in our epoch, the feminization of poverty, the deprivation of forests, the increased immigration and boat people and transfer of huge populations from one continent to another arose from the absence of rights to subsistence. So I made a parallel between the woodland epoch and the petroleum period. And it was these two themes that are interwoven in the work that I produced, the Magna Carta Manifesto, the theme of subsistence for all and the theme of protections against autocracy or tyranny.
So who were the principal authors of the Magna Carta?
I'm not as sophisticated as I'd like to be in answer to your question, because in a way I want to dodge it. It's not, I think there are some individuals. Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, comes to mind first of all. But the reason I want to dodge it is that he responds to social forces, and so his authority as an author is a collective one. He has to negotiate with barons, with merchants, with peasantry in order to attain stability in this armistice that Magna Carta is. It's a peace treaty, basically, between class forces. So sometimes we hear the word author and we have a notion of individuality that I think it contrasts with the anonymity that otherwise the historian is faced with. You know, the old English ditty, the law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. This is anonymous, and when we think about it, we see the principle of incarceration or enclosure and criminalization on the one hand is logically and historically tied to the deprivation of subsistence and the commons on the other hand. So, you know, I contrast individuality with anonymity, but in answer to your question.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really looking so much for individuals, and more to if it was like the elite that wrote it, or if the regular commoners were fairly represented within it.
Very, very important question. But certainly they're represented in it very powerfully in Chapter 7 of Magna Carta, which grants to the widow her reasonable estovers in the common, where estovers means subsistence access to wood. So they respond to commoners. It's not until really the 17th century, the time of the slave trade, the time of the witch burnings, the time of the settlement of European people in North America, that the common people begin to appear on history in their own name, so to speak. This is the time of the English Revolution, the time of the levelers, the time of the diggers. And England wants to export them, get rid of them, and hence the settlement or colonization of the American colonies, the indentured servants and the white slavery. With those charters of the American colonies is often the verbatim Chapter 39 from Magna Carta, which now reappears in human history on the other side of the ocean, and as principles of Virginia, Massachusetts, and some other colonies. And it's from there that then Thomas Paine or the founders of the USA derive their link Magna Carta to the Declaration of Independence and then to the American legal tradition.
Was the Magna Carta written primarily at one point in time, or has it been added to over the years?
Yes, another good question, and that really occupies scholars, because it's an evolving principles. Even at the beginning, it was written in Latin. There are about 17 copies of it that clerks would write out. But right away it was published, and the way they published back then was not by print. Remember, this is before print, but by reading it aloud from pulpits in cathedrals. And it was read aloud in Latin, it was read in Norman French, and it was read even in English by the 14th century. After the Renaissance, after the era of print, it becomes more widespread. But the notion of publication or broadcasting is one that's not just print, not just software, but was the human voice, viva voce. This is how Magna Carta and the Chart of the Forest was made known. But even in the Middle Ages, the peasantry was, of course, suspicious of print and writing, as often it contained traps for them. And in the great peasant revolts of the Middle Ages, one of the targets was the destruction of such manuscripts. But there were also among peasants those who were literate and who were able to read the gold and azure letters of the inks of the precious and beautiful parchment manuscripts of that time. I was interested in this, Mike, because I was saying, well, where did they get these inks from? And the gold inks would come from Africa. The azure inks, or blue inks, would come from lapis lazuli, and that would be Afghanistan and Persia. So here, these great manuscripts of the Middle Ages have their material existence in Africa and in Central Asia. I was fascinated by this. But of course, it is... the meanings of the charters are ones that, as I said earlier, grow and evolve with human struggle. And I think it's time again for them to change in relationship to the dire needs that we face now.
You mentioned a term, the feminization of poverty. Can you define that?
Well, just that... looking at the demographic pyramid or structure of human life, we are all our mother's children. Our reproduction depends on the health of women. Our existence, not just as in parturition, not just in birth, but our nurturance as infants depends on her access to subsistence. And it is this which has been so severely threatened in the era of neoliberalism, from Chiapas, from Bolivia to Kenya to South Africa to Sumatra or Indonesia. It's the elderly, it's the children, and it's the women who suffer first. And so with the huge crises brought about by the expropriation from land, from forest, from waters, and their privatization, the women will suffer first. And so that's what I mean by the feminization of poverty in our own era.
So you had also mentioned that the Magna Carta was essentially like a peace plan to end a class war that was going on. Did it indeed end the class war then? Eventually.
The class war takes other forms. It so far hasn't ended. I don't want to get too reductionist here. So I think I think we all need to think about this subject much more than we do. It's a power relation. In the Middle Ages, Magna Carta was a kind of a settlement. It was a truce. We have important principles that derive from it and more that can derive from it, but in itself, it is no answer to our problems. It is on our side, should we choose to employ it. Mike, there was one other thing, I think perhaps the most important thing in Magna Carta, and I forgot to mention it yesterday at the wonderful National Lawyers Guild Conference on the Law of the Commons, and that is perhaps the most important principle of all in Magna Carta, and the one that certainly attracted Tom Paine. And perhaps the time will come when we need it, and that is the principle of resistance to autocratic power by any means necessary. Yes, that's the foundation in Magna Carta, and that's, I think, something that many of us are thinking now.
So is that literally written into the Magna Carta?
Yes. Yes, it is. There's not only the principle of resistance, but the principle of reparations. Bad King John had to return the forests that he had taken, those that his brother, Richard Richard the Lionhearted, had taken forests left, right, and center over England. And their father, Henry II, had done the same. The principle of reparations is in Magna Carta, in that all these forests had to be returned. Justice involved restitution, material restitution for crimes done, for harm caused. And so the Magna Carta is also a great redress of grievances and can also be used in our debates about reparations.
So I'm sure you're familiar with that saying that the victors of a war always get to write the history books, and applying that to the class warfare, it appears that, at least here in the States, you don't generally, at least in the corporate media, hear about class warfare. There is no class in the United States. We're all one big happy family.
Well, yes, of course. We know the line. But then I think, how many families have a copy, near at hand in the kitchen of Howard Zinn's People's History of the USA? I'm sure many of your listeners do. Or how many of us, will purchase that book to give to one of our children for a birthday or graduation present? How many of us know that what we learned from our grandparents and their struggles is so at odds with the line from the corporate media, as you were saying? So when we have to fight for our history, when we have to honor our grandparents and the knowledge of the past, then history lives. If it's just spoon-fed from the pablum of the corporate media and the institutionalization of the fog factories of American corporate education that just bows down to standardized tests and turns us all into cogs in a machine, when we fight against that, we do so with our own mind. We do so with our own struggles, and then it lives.
But I was reminded of that while you were talking, that that you pointed out that resistance is written into the Magna Carta, as well as documents that were written after that, I believe.
Yes, the Declaration of Independence is always good to read. I'm always disappointed on the 4th of July at how infrequently it's read, but it lists 24 reasons for throwing out the king. And of course, it's not just the king, but it's all levels of autocracy, from the little bosses that rule over us, the wilderness of turnpike gates, to use a phrase of Tom Paine's, the bureaucratic nightmares that many of us have to suffer. Yes, this is monarchy. It's not just the king, but it's a structure of tyranny and autocracy that the Declaration of Independence can help us resist.
As well, were there any mention of reparations within the Declaration of Independence and or the Constitution?
No, because here, Mike, we have the other side, and I don't want to get too dewy-eyed on this. The Declaration of Independence is the start. It's a settler's document, And in the 1770s and the next decade, the idea was to take the lands of the Shawnee, the Iroquois, the Potawatomi, and the Miamis in the Ohio Valley. Yes, and of course it came with the slave plantation. So we don't get dewy-eyed about any of these documents. We don't worship them. They're not idols. We respect our history from below, but we also use our critical intelligence and realize that the USA is a settler society based upon the robbery of lands, and then it became a great slave society. And we honor these struggles that have seek reparations for these wrongs. And we look into our own past as immigrants from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, in order to rectify them and build a future worth living, a future without destruction, a future without building weapons of destruction, looking for an economy that's not based on bullying. Yes.
So do you feel that if documents like the Magna Carta were more a part of our regular everyday lives, that we wouldn't, as a nation and a world, be in the same situations that we are now?
I think if the principles in the document were brought alive again by many subsequent documents, the 14th Amendment, I think the Article 7A of the National Recovery Administration and the New Deal, the Wagner Act, there are many, I think there are many documents of human liberation that can be brought to us. I got interested in Magna Carta mainly because it has a deep and venerable interest among lawyers. And as I say, I was just utterly blown away by what I found in it. And, you know, Bush and so many of his own lawyers, from John Yoo to Gonzalez, I mean, I don't want to upbraid them for being bad English history students. I don't think that's really the issue. But they are torture mongers, they're autocrats, they are servants to the powerful, and it's up to us to renew law as a basis of equality and solidarity.
So you are a historian. Can you give us your sense of, in a historical perspective, where we are at this point in time? We have a new administration in D.C. that appears to be heading in a slightly different direction than the previous administration. What's your sense for where things are heading?
Well, I think, I'm very interested, very curious. Of course, I'm susceptible to the charm of the young president. Of course, I shed a tear over the struggles of the past of the American civil rights movement. Yes, of course, I share these emotions with everyone. But as for the planet, as for the policies, as for the bailout, it doesn't bode well to believe that as we lose the solution to lost homes, the solution to the destruction of music in schools, is to pay bankers money. It just seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? You know, what kind of economy is that to meet human subsistence? And it's not just a matter of bankers or Wall Street people, you know, having expensive rugs or toilets made of gold. No, I think it's deeper than that. And how to meet and create our own needs. I think people have begun to think about this in a more open mind, using the righteousness and justice of our anger, but also, I think, searching for one another. I would like to say something about the new people coming to the United States. Immigrants from all over the world will bring experiences here that we have lost. We are powerful, but we are weak in knowledge. When I say we, I mean the USA. people outside are weak in material goods, but often strong in experience. In the struggles against autocracy of Central America, or of West Africa, or of Pakistan, or India. So the globalization of bringing people together, I think, may bode well for us in the future.
So are you working on your next book at this point in time?
Yes, Mike, I'm really interested with Tom Paine. You know, I've just written an introduction to the republication of agrarian justice and the rights of man and common sense, and really learned a lot about Tom Paine. I think he's wonderful, and basically, you know, he wants to start anew. His notion of revolution is a new beginning, and not obeisance and getting down on our knees to the dead hand of the past. He also has an interest in fairness and equality for all in material terms, not just in terms of voting or representation, but in terms of livelihood, of social security, of human welfare, of the Commonwealth. So this being the bicentennial of his death, oh, the poor guy, man. You know, at his funeral, a woman showed up, Madame de Bonville, a French woman, 2 African Americans, and a handful of United Irishmen. Otherwise, all those whose pen had led a revolution ignored him and dissed him at the very end. This 2009 is the 200th anniversary of his death. So that's what I've been interested in recently.
What was it, briefly, that caused those to break, that he had shared so much with, to break ranks with him?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was imprisoned in France during the Terror, and just by the angel of death passed him by a curious accident. But Gouverneur Morris was the American ambassador to Paris, and behind him George Washington was president, and they didn't lift a finger to save him from the guillotine. And I think this certainly angered him, angered Tom Paine. Tom Paine was an egalitarian, and of course the great Federalists of the first decade of American history were not. They were slavocrats, they were American aristocrats, they were plutocrats, they worshiped money. And while Tom Paine was by no means a leveler, he was egalitarian, and they didn't like this. He thought that revolution he was a citizen of the world. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that, we're unfortunately out of time. So I'd very much like to thank you for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Mike, it's been my pleasure.
We have just been talking with Professor Peter Linebaugh. He is author of the book, The Magna Carta Manifesto, Liberties and Commons for All.
So Freemason is below Illuminati. If
I
you
will
try to explain
yes.
clearly, so
yes.
the listeners understand.
Yes.
Right now you were talking about Freemasonry. So
sure.
what's the role of Illuminati and where that is placed
now,
in that scheme?
In all this scheme of things, at the foundation of Freemasonry, we find also, obviously, the Stuart. We were mentioning Xavier Ramsay. Who were these? Were Catholics. Catholics. Obviously, in 1770, an order, which is the most powerful order to this day of the Catholic Church, the order of the Jesuits, became basically legal. The Vatican said, these people are a threat even to the Church. I mean, you know, they were founded by Ignazio Loyola. They picked up the system of the Knights Templars from Portugal and so on, and they filtered it as a power structure. They became basically a militia, spies of the Vatican. South America is being literally created by the Jesuits. Statues of Ignazio Loyola are everywhere in South America. But who was Ignazio Loyola? Ignazio Loyola was a guy who went to the king and said, oh, there is some creatures in Africa, they smell a bit, they're black, but we can use them as slaves. That was Ignazio Loyola, who's now is a saint. So that also should make you meditate a little bit about the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the core structure behind some of the most evil moments of history in the last 500 years, including Nazism, communism, and whatnot. They are always behind the scene. They are the scientists of the Vatican, the men of great culture, but most of all, the Jesuits are the only ones who have a general. They don't have some abbot, some head which is a monk. No, it's a general. It's called the Black Pope in the code, in the name they give at the Vatican. Black Pope is Adolf Nicholas. You have it written down now. But actually, these days is the era of the two Black Popes.
Who's the other one?
Hans Kovenbach, who didn't give up his job. In fact, when recently, 2 years ago, I was able to have this document from Borgo Santo Spirito. I opened it up. It was a presentation of the Jesuit order in the year 2008. I opened it because they were doing an interview to me and also to the Jesuits about the Illuminati during the, I think it was 2009, during the promotion of Angels and Demons. Panorama, which is this important magazine, came to me. Then they went to Borgo Santo Spirito and said, Leo, don't come into Borgo Santo Spirito because, you're not welcome here. I said, okay. Journalists went in, with the Academy of the Illuminati members who were doing this. I said, okay, I don't care. But they brought me this document. I opened it and said, this is the era of the two generals. Geez, already one is bad. Two, it's just terrible. So, the era of the two generals. One is in Lebanon. So he presides over the Middle East, and the other one is in Rome, doing the rest of the business. Where does Adolf Nicholas come from, though? He was head of the Jesuits in Japan. The Secretary for Interreligious Dialogue of the Jesuits, which I personally know, and I met also in Oslo, Thomas Michel, instead was the head of the Jesuits also for Asia. So there is a strong interest in Asia, in China, and Japan at this moment. That's why I'm talking about Japan and China. Really, everybody's trying to grasp the alliances here. And we can say one thing about the Jesuits. They were the first people who ever went to Japan. The first people who the emperor ever met from Europe were the Jesuits. Imagine that. And the problem here is this. Why we basically went there and the Jesuits were able to spy on them and all that, all their tradition, and kind of do their usual secret service operation. We, in exchange, were not really able to have the exchange of culture from the other side, because the Jesuits will only keep it for themselves. They used to say, we rule the world from this building, which is in the corner in front of the Vatican, on the left. Small. We rule the world from here. So the Jesuits were behind the establishment of the degrees of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. They were behind the foundation of the Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt, who was a professor of canonic law at the University of Ingolstadt. And they basically are still to this day the link to the Academy of the Illuminati, which has been restructured officially in the year 2000. Saint Francis went to the Middle East after founding his order. What he found in the Middle East was very interesting. He found another religion that very few people knew in detail at that time, which was the Islamic religion. And in the Islamic religions, they have the whole story of how Ismail and, and then he discovered that actually that Allah was the same God it was the same Abrahamic God that they had in his religion. And he was astonished. I mean, for us nowadays, it seems normal that, Muslims believe in one God and we believe in God. No. In the medieval time, Allah was God, we had another God and the other ones had another God altogether, Jehovah, whatever. So, and when St. Francis returned to Rome, he went to the Pope and said, I heard some really incredible stories, we are really all brothers. The Pope said to St. Francis, mind your own business, we know that, but you are not allowed to say it. So just go back home and mind your own business. In the meantime, St. Francis was actually, they took his Franciscan order and gave it to somebody else. So he went to the military, he came back, he wasn't even the head of his order anymore. They already had founded several hundred monasteries, and he ended up his life basically without being in control of anything, because he was a truly revolutionary man of faith, while instead the Vatican, as usual, is business.
To whom Vatican reports? Who controls them?
Well, the Jesuits love to be in contact with the most demonic forces. And they love also to be great astronomers. They have one of the greatest observatories in Mount Graham. As well as the Jewish Kabbalists, the Jesuits practice occult rituals that link them to several entities. Those entities are the fallen entities. They are not the superior entities eventually of light that we define as angels. So, I mean, the Vatican is controlled by the darkest of darkest force, you know. Though they are visibly taking the religion from a solar cult, which is visible when you arrive in Rome, you know. Everything, you know, even St. Peter's Square is all shaped in a way with so you have the sun passing at certain moments of time in one part or the other of the square in various periods of the year. And also you have the Isis current, which they have picked up and put into the Holy Mary belief. We can say that
Verendre runestone. Verendre, or La Verendre, was an early French explorer of the West and was the first European to reach and describe the Rocky Mountains. On his journey, the Verendre party discovered a stone that Perry describes as possibly being the pillow stone of Jacob. In antiquity, this stone was said to have been in the tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem before the destruction of the temple. Many consider this stone to be the Holy Grail or Philosopher's Stone. All of the historical descriptions of the finding of the stone say that it was discovered atop a pillar.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Ash Nandoa and I'm co-hosting today's show. Today we have Raisa of Premiers and the Gold Ring Game of Enlightenment and Abundance, and the great honor of interviewing Freeman, producer and host of the Freeman Perspective, as well as author of the Freeman blog. So this should be very interesting. We have two leading radio show hosts discussing leading-edge issues involving symbolism, government conspiracies, mind control, and ancient civilizations. On the Freeman blog, we'll be posting you the links on the chat here, and on his website, he covers a great number of topics, including corporate logos in Colombia, merfolk, Nephilim. He's done a lot of interviews himself and some very interesting people that you can see there on his website as well. He's also author of the Freeman Perspective, Codex Magica, Return of the Nephilim, and many, many other documentaries, I guess. Freeman is considered an expert in the field of the occult, trauma-based mind control, government conspiracy, and ancient civilizations. He graduated with an Associate of Arts with honors in interdisciplinary studies and attended Kansas University, specializing in ancient environmental architecture. Freeman's film subjects include the occult meanings of corporate logos, America's Goddess, Columbia, weather modification, space-based weapons, chemtrails, ancient astronauts, Anna Nicole's death, Britney Spears and Disney mind control, cloning technology in the ancient past and today. Freeman, are you on here? I'm going to talk a little more a bit about you before I introduce the host and the other co-host as well. Hello, Freeman. Oh, he's muted. So we'll unmute him.
Am I there now?
There you are. So you were born in the middle of summer.
In the middle of the summer of love.
And a very shy boy most of your life. That
Yes,
didn't speak to classmates until grade 6. A very intelligent young lad, from what I hear, too.
Constantly an honor student, no doubt about that, but I think the bane of my teacher's existence, though.
And with always a great sense of compassion as well. Your life has been an adventure from the beginning, and you wanted to be a spaceman as a child and not in the meaning of astronaut, right?
That's true.
Your father, with his ties to it, and your mother as well?
Yes, well, my own personal research came from ancient astronaut research, such things as Erich von Däniken and the idea of gods from outer space. And the UFO interest came from my own continuous experiences that I really have no recollection of, which is, strange for most people that have these type of occurrences, that they occurred. You discuss the UFOs with your friends, but you have no recollection now at an adult. Of the actual craft or anything that occurred. So I've had a long line of UFO experiences throughout my life and even up into my adult life. Recently, having a large V-shaped craft fly over my car on my way to meet the high priest of the Church of Satan. Or a large rectangular craft that was hovering over Daytona Beach when I graduated from college, in which me and a friend lost 5 hours of time. And it was at that moment that I began to predict world events. And I don't know that, I have the sensation that I was shown the future. But I don't know that that's the case.
You predict world events also not so much in the form of how a psychic does, but you use all of the background in your study, as well as your digging into the Freemasonry and everything else, with their symbology. Now, can you explain that a bit further?
Sure. What we see are a lot of symbolic gestures. One of the prime examples would be the capping of the Great Pyramid with gold for Y2K. So this, to me, was a suggestion that they had completed their Novo Ordo Seclorum and brought out their New World Order. It's these type of symbolic gestures that can clue you into what they're after, as long as you're also coupling this with the political agenda. So we have ceremonial magicians with a political agenda, so you can put these two things together. So yeah, my predictions were based on a formulaic science that I had somewhat attuned myself to. And like I say, as far as the flying rectangle story, I have no knowledge of anything that occurred. All I know is I lost 5 hours. But then from that moment on, I seemed to see the pattern. And I don't usually equate it with that story. I usually keep those two separate because the pattern is real. The idea of what I saw was real. And what I was looking at was psychological warfare on a grand scale to bring about a global government. And this is something that many know and many talk about, but what they don't recognize is the magical or ceremonial aspects of it all. And then also the esoteric or occult or extraterrestrial connections of it all. So once you take in the idea and the understanding of ancient civilizations, you recognize that there are things from our ancient past that we cannot explain nor reproduce, such as Baalbek, Lebanon, that has blocks that are 800 tons, too large for any of our modern cranes to move, and yet they had been moved from large distances to where they stand in Lebanon today. And there they stand to make us question. The Great Pyramid.
And Easter Island as well.
Easter Island,
now,
Peru, yeah.
And the capping of the stone, can you talk about that? You mentioned it a little bit earlier with this, with the event.
The capping of the Great Pyramid. Well, what you start to recognize is that this occult brotherhood deals with magical science. And so when you start to understand Satanism, when you go talk to the high priest of the Church of Satan, he's not going to be talking to you about this evil god, Satan. I don't think most of the beliefs of Satanism have anything to do with Satan in the biblical sense. But what they will talk to you about is creating etheric machines that are to open portals in the other dimension to let the old ones enter, as Rex Church has his Ragnarok engine to do this very thing. You realize that Satanists are into high-tech occultism, that Jack Parsons of Jet Propulsion's laboratory was a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was Aleister Crowley's cult when he took over, and all of the connections to our high sciences keep going back to these ancient mystery schools. And so when you start to get to dates and watching periods of time, what we realize is most of these ancient structures of Luxor in Egypt or Tiahuanacan in Mexico, all of these different structures are set up to watch time. They are watching the sun at very specific moments, calculating them with certain stars so that you can determine where you're at in the universe. Well, this timeline seems to outline, perhaps, as some have suggested, a catastrophe, a cyclical catastrophe that occurs on Earth, and therefore leaving us devastated. And as the ancient tales tell us, that there was a race that had superior technology in the ancient past, and then there were those that were running around after the Great Flood or the catastrophe that had no more technology, civilization, or even agriculture, or any of these things. And so the great civilizers came, and they imparted these civilizations onto nations. So Egypt, there is no pre-Egypt. It just is. It just came into being. So obviously a transplant colony from somewhere. Many equate to either Atlantis or even Mars as an extrastellar civilization. So the capping of the Great Pyramid with gold was a symbolic gesture by the elite to announce that they were moving towards this final closure of this New World Order. Because as you see on the pyramid on the dollar bill, the Eye of Osiris or Horus or Set, depending on who you want to believe, is floating above the pyramid as a work in progress. And then when capped the Great Pyramid, that is the completion. Well, throughout the entire Y2K ritual, we saw where they made this symbolic gesture to Horus. And so they burnt the river Thames to the speed of the sun with fireworks. They had ignited each of Osiris's phalluses, the Eiffel Tower and the Washington Monument. They then had the sun rise in the west over the Lincoln Memorial, making a light so bright in America it could be seen in Europe as if the sun was rising. The sun of the west, again, is Horus. And the capping of the Great Pyramid was supposed to occur during the 12 Dreams of the Sun performed by Jean-Michel Jarre, and a helicopter was to bring this giant golden capstone to rest upon the top of the pyramid. But there was much controversy about this. And Zahi Hawass, I believe, was, yes, in charge of the Giza Plateau at that time. Now he is absolute head of the Giza Plateau. At that time he was undersecretary. He is all connected up with the ARE, with Edgar Cayce, and the connections with the lost hidden knowledge of Egypt. And he's even announced finding the tomb of Osiris deep under the pyramids. Okay, so as you start to see these symbolic gestures unfolding, what happened was that the capping was canceled. But what was curious is that there was an Egyptian flight leaving out of LAX, out of LA, and flying to LaGuardia in New York, and then taking off to the Giza Plateau prior to the capping of the Great Pyramid with gold. Now, there was picked up. Now, it was said by Richard Hoagland and a few others that this jet made a mysterious stop at Edwards Air Force Base, and there picked up 33 Egyptian military and a head scientist of Jet Propulsion's laboratories. Now, once again, back to the occult. And they flew these 33 and a scientist to to New York to leave off for the Giza Plateau, and as they were flying off of the bay, they suddenly took a nosedive into the ocean. Now, the pilot had regained control of the airplane, and then it crashed again. And this time, the pilot calls out a Muslim prayer as this plane of all these people, 218, I think, went crashing into the ocean. Now, this was before 9/11. This was before terrorists, quote-unquote, So when this plane crashed, they classified it as pilot suicide. But it was just after the crashing of these 33 Egyptian military with their rocket scientists that they canceled the Great Pyramid with gold, having a headline in the USA Today even stating, "Muslims stop the Freemasons from capping the Great Pyramid with gold." Now, very few people noticed that headline on the USA Today in December of '99. I wish I had kept a copy, but I did not. So as we start to witness the symbolic gestures and understand who they are, we bring this back to the occult. We understand that Aleister Crowley had said we were moving into the Aeon of Horus, the crowned and conquering child, and that this all equated to the number 11. And this is where we'll get to the symbolism of 9 and 11 and how this equates to sinister nature. You can start to put together what's going on.
Gregorian calendar that was established for this?
Well, there is a lot of belief about that there were much better calendars that could have been used back when they decided on the Gregorian calendar. I believe it was a Japanese scientist who had actually, I'll have to double check that, but there were better calendars than the one that we selected. And this one did seem to outline and set up a way so that 2000 fell at that moment with the astrological alignments with Sirius and Alpha Draconis. Mm-hmm. So when you start to understand this, then you realize, okay, there's this synarchy, an oligarchy of fraternal mystery schools that rule our planet, that work within occult nature, and then also on psychological warfare. So when Bill Clinton came into office and he was taken down for a sexual affair that most people went, so, whatever. Most of our presidents have had affairs, and it's normally national security. When they brought Bill Clinton down, they made it all public and had him sitting out there purple in front of the public discussing insertions of cigars into Monica Lewinsky. This, to me, was psychological warfare. This was the key ingredient to me that set me off on the path that made me say that from this moment on, they're going to force a president into office, and then the president following him would not be considered an American. So the reason being was that to force the president was to bring down our ideal of the system. So first they brought down the man, the saxophone-playing Bill Clinton. Then they brought down the system by forcing a president into office, and then the next president to be considered ineligible because they want to bring down the Constitution. So this was the path that I saw. Then that's the political spectrum. So
you saw that when?
When Bill Clinton was brought before on the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Mm-hmm. Because it's unheard of, right? We do not bring our presidents out in front of the public and discuss the type of things that they discussed with Bill Clinton in front of everyone. This is not normal. And so it had to have been psychological warfare. So what were they trying to do? They're trying to bring down and design a global world, and therefore they needed to bring down this bastion of freedom. So we now have been designated as Satan, and you will see that as we get through the ritual aspect of this. So that's the political aspect. Then when you start to recognize...
And that we've been designated as Satan as in the Americas, you mean?
Yes, yes.
And designated by...
Well, in the psychological warfare. So we're supposed to be hated at this point. And so as we moved out from the Bill Clinton era, I had said, okay, I heard the rumblings of this W. And at that point had started to learn the Kabbalistic meaning of W. So what you need to realize is that Freemasonry is Kabbalism. The founder of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the one that organized, well, not the founder, but the one who organized all of the rituals and degrees, Albert Pike, in his main thesis called Morals and Dogma, states over 70 times that Freemasonry is Kabbalism. Kabbalism is an ancient Hebrew form of mysticism. So each of your transliterations need to go to Hebrew. So when we look at something like W, when you see that letter, in Hebrew, that's 6 and 6, because V equals 6. And 6 and 6 in Kabbalah is the number of the dark side. It's what's known as the Qlipoth, or the shells, the dark side of the tree of life. So when we start to see this numerology, like Phillips 66, Highway 66, we're seeing the number of the dark side gendered. Now, we can take this even further back to Adolf Hitler, who was also a practicer of ancient Hebrew mysticism in his study of theosophy with Madame Blavatsky. And he incorporated this very VV or W symbolism